September 23rd, 1942. Stalingrad, southern bank of the Volga River. The morning begins with the sound of metal screaming as bombs fall out of a pale autumn sky. The Luftwaffe's engines already fading eastward as the first fires take hold. Inside the Stalingrad tractor factory, known to its workers simply as STZ, senior technician Ivan Petrovich Sokolov grips the edge of a steel workbench as the concrete floor shudders beneath his boots. Dust rains from the rafters. Somewhere in the distance, a T-34 engine backfires, coughing to life through smoke thick enough to sting the eyes. Sokolov does not run. None of the men do. They have learned that running wastes time, and time is armor they cannot afford to shed. The factory hall is cavernous, or at least it once was. Now the ceiling is torn open in places, sunlight spilling through jagged holes alongside drifting ash. Overhead, cranes hang frozen like broken arms. Conveyor lines snake across the floor, interrupted by craters and piles of shattered brick. Yet amid the ruin, movement continues. Steel plates are dragged into place by gloved hands. Rivets are hammered home between detonations. Welding torches flare and hiss, their blue light dancing against blackened walls. Another explosion strikes closer this time. The shockwave slams into Sokolov's chest, knocking the breath from him. A young fitter named Mikhail stumbles, catching himself against the sloped armor of a half-finished tank hull. He laughs, a sharp, almost hysterical sound, then bends back to his work, fingers trembling as he aligns a track pin. Outside, German artillery has found the range. Shells from the 6th Army's guns scream in low, flat arcs, smashing into the factory grounds with methodical precision. The Germans have studied maps, aerial photographs, intelligence reports. They know this place. They know what it produces. They believe that by noon, it will be rubble. Inside the hull beside Sokolov, the smell of oil and hot metal is overpowering. The tank has no turret yet, only an open ring fringed with raw steel teeth. Its interior is bare, wires dangling like exposed nerves. The paint is unfinished, the familiar green primer streaked with soot and fingerprints. It does not matter. Orders have come down from the City Defense Committee. Any tank that can move will move today. Sokolov wipes sweat from his brow, leaving a black smear across his face. He thinks briefly of his wife and daughter across the river, of the narrow wooden boat that ferried them east weeks ago under shellfire. He pushes the thought aside. The work comes first. It must. At the far end of the hall, a Red Army officer in a dust-covered greatcoat argues with a plant foreman. The officer's rank tabs mark him as a captain, his voice hoarse from shouting over the din. "How many can you give me by evening?" the captain demands. The foreman glances around at the devastation, at the shattered windows and twisted rails, then back at the line of tanks inching forward like wounded animals. "If the engines hold," he says carefully, 5, maybe 6. The captain nods once. He does not smile. Outside, infantry units are already digging in among the rubble of workers' housing and loading docks. German assault pioneers are pushing closer, their flamethrowers licking at the edges of the complex. The factory is no longer behind the front. It is the front. A siren wails, then cuts off abruptly as shrapnel tears through its housing. Another bomb lands somewhere near the power station. The lights flicker. For a moment, darkness threatens to swallow the hall. Then generators kick in, coughing electricity back into the cables. The welders' torches flare again. At mid-morning, the first tank is ready. Its crew, 3 men in blackened padded jackets, climb aboard under the supervision of a political officer who shouts encouragements that sound more like commands. The driver guns the engine. The T-34 lurches forward, its tracks grinding over debris as it noses toward the shattered factory doors. As it passes Sokolov, he reaches out and slaps the armor. A worker's blessing carried out of habit rather than superstition. The steel is warm under his palm. Beyond the doors, The world is a storm of smoke and fire. German machine gun bullets spark against the tank's glacis as it turns left, straight toward the sound of battle. There is no ceremony, no pause. The tank does not even stop to mount its side fuel drums. It rolls directly from the assembly floor into combat, its unfinished paint already scorched by war. High above the city, German reconnaissance pilots circle and radio their observations back to command posts miles away. They report flames, destruction, collapsed buildings. What they do not yet understand is that beneath the smoke, the factory is still alive. By noon, more tanks will follow, one after another, born into fire. And somewhere, west of the Volga, German commanders will begin to realize that something has gone terribly wrong with their expectations. The Stalingrad tractor factory has not fallen silent, and the day is far from over. September 24th, 1942. Gumrak Airfield, west of Stalingrad. Oberstleutnant Hans-Georg von Reichenau stands beside a canvas-covered operations table as the morning reconnaissance reports are read aloud, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. The air smells of aviation fuel and damp earth. Somewhere beyond the runway, artillery continues its steady thunder, a dull, constant heartbeat echoing across the steppe. Von Reichenau has been awake since before dawn, his uniform still dusted with chalky residue from yesterday's bombing runs. The Luftwaffe liaison officer clears his throat and points to a marked aerial photograph spread across the table. The image shows the northern industrial district of Stalingrad, what should be a field of ruins. Instead, faint but unmistakable, are fresh track marks leading away from the Stalingrad tractor factory toward the riverbank. Our pilots report armoured movement originating inside the factory complex, the officer says carefully. At least 3 vehicles observed engaging infantry units near the workers' settlements. Von Reichenau frowns. Vehicles, he repeats. What vehicles? T-34s, Herr Oberstleutnant. For a moment, no one speaks. The wind flaps at the edges of the canvas tent, rattling the metal poles. Von Reichenau leans closer to the photograph, as if proximity alone might change what he is seeing. That facility was struck repeatedly yesterday, he says. Heavy bombs, direct hits. Yes, sir. And it is burning. Then how? Von Reichenau asks quietly. Are tanks leaving it? The question hangs unanswered. The Luftwaffe officer shifts uncomfortably. He knows the implications as well as anyone. The entire operational assumption of the Sixth Army, that Soviet industrial capacity within the city would collapse under sustained bombardment, is being challenged by a handful of grainy observations and the wrecks of German half-tracks now littering the factory outskirts. Later that morning, von Reichenau travels forward to an observation post overlooking the northern districts. The journey is short but perilous. Soviet artillery shells burst intermittently along the road, forcing his driver to weave through craters and wrecked supply trucks. When they arrive, the Oberstleutnant climbs a rubble-strewn slope and raises his field glasses. Stalingrad stretches before him like a carcass picked clean by fire. Buildings stand gutted and roofless, their walls pocked with shell scars. Smoke rises in greasy columns from a dozen points along the river, yet through the haze, movement is visible. Soviet infantry dart between ruins. And then he sees it, unmistakable even at a distance. A T-34 emerges from behind a shattered warehouse, its turret swinging methodically as it fires point-blank into a German strongpoint. The tank's paint is uneven, streaked with soot. Its markings are crude, hastily applied. It looks less like a finished weapon than a machine torn prematurely from the womb. Von Reichenau lowers his glasses slowly. They're building them there, he mutters. Still building them. Around him, staff officers exchange uneasy glances. One captain ventures a suggestion. Perhaps these were completed earlier and only now deployed. Von Reichenau shakes his head. No, we would have seen them. Our air reconnaissance is constant. As if to underscore his words, another Soviet tank clatters into view, followed by a third. German anti-tank guns open fire, their shells ringing against sloped armour. One tank shudders, smoke pouring from its engine deck, but it keeps moving long enough to fire again before grinding to a halt. Back at 6th Army headquarters, the reports pile up. General Friedrich Paulus reads them in silence, his thin lips pressed into a hard line. He is a meticulous man, a planner, uncomfortable with surprises. And this defiance of logic and precedent, unsettles him deeply. Industrial facilities do not function under direct artillery fire, not for days, not even for hours. That is what doctrine teaches. That is what experience confirms. Yet Stalingrad refuses to conform. Paulus dictates an order: intensified bombing of the factory district, immediate priority. The Luftwaffe will strike again and again until nothing remains standing. He expects acknowledgement, obedience, results. What he does not know, what he cannot see from his maps and reports, is what is happening inside the factories at that very moment. Back within the shattered halls of the Dzerzhinsky tractor factory, another tank is nearing completion. The assembly line no longer exists in any conventional sense. Workstations have been rearranged around craters. Components are scavenged from damaged vehicles and stockpiles dragged by hand through debris-choked corridors. Sergeant Nikolai Karpov, newly assigned as a tank commander, watches as his crew clambers aboard their machine. The tank's radio is missing. The optics are scratched. The paint is barely dry. None of that matters. What matters is that the gun fires and the engine runs. A factory worker presses a scrap of paper into Karpov's hand, a list of quirks and warnings scrawled in pencil. "Second gear sticks," the man says. "And the clutch, be gentle." Karpov nods solemnly. He does not ask the worker's name. There is no time. As the tank rumbles toward the exit, German shells land close enough to shower the hull with fragments. One explosion caves in part of the roof behind them, sealing the passage in fire and dust. The path forward remains open, narrow but passable. Outside, the tank joins the fight within minutes, its first shots fired from a position that, by every rule of war, should no longer exist. By late afternoon, Luftwaffe bombers return in force. Stukas dive screaming toward the factory district, their sirens howling like mechanical predators. Bombs tear into the ruins, collapsing walls, igniting fuel stores, crushing men and machines alike. And still, in pockets of smoke and shadow, welding torches flare. German forward units report the appearance of yet more tanks. Unexpected, unaccounted for. Anti-tank gunners curse in disbelief as fresh armour rolls into streets they thought secured. That evening, as Paulus studies the latest situation map, a junior officer remarks under his breath, "It is as if the city itself is producing weapons." Paulus does not respond. He stares at the red and blue lines, at the stubborn knot of Soviet resistance centered on the factory complexes. For the first time since the campaign began, doubt creeps into his calculations. The enemy is not merely defending Stalingrad, it is manufacturing defiance under fire. September 26, 1942, Dzerzhinsky Tractor Factory, northern Stalingrad. The night has barely lifted when the artillery begins again, each shell arriving with a shriek that drills straight into the bones. Inside what remains of the Dzerzhinsky Tractor Factory, Lieutenant Alexei Morozov crouches beside a concrete pillar, helmet pressed low as fragments of brick and glass skitter across the floor. He is a tank officer by training, but here, in this place, the distinction between soldier and worker has all but vanished. Morozov wipes grit from his mouth and looks toward the assembly bay. Where there should be neat lines of machinery, there is chaos, twisted frames, overturned carts, engines suspended at odd angles by chains that creak with every concussion. And yet, at the centre of it all, a T-34 hull sits squarely on its tracks, stubborn and intact, like a clenched fist amid open wounds. A factory woman named Anna Yermakova leans into the hull, tightening a bolt with hands wrapped in oily rags. Her hair is tied back with a strip of cloth torn from a first aid bandage. She does not look up when another shell detonates outside, close enough to bow the steel plates inward with a deep, resonant clang. Turret rings aligned, she shouts over the noise. If you're putting a crew in it, do it now. Morozov nods and motions his men forward. They scramble across debris, boots slipping on oil and blood. One of them, a gunner barely out of training, pauses when he sees a body half buried under fallen masonry. Morozov grips his shoulder and pushes him onward. There will be time for grief later, if there is time at all. Above them, the factory's roof groans. A section collapses without warning, sending a cascade of sparks and dust into the bay. The air fills with the smell of burning insulation and cordite. Someone screams, then falls silent. Despite it all, the engine is lowered into place. Chains rattle. Men shout numbers and instructions. The engine mounts are bolted down by feel rather than sight. Fingers numb from cold and fear. When the starter is engaged, there is a heart-stopping moment of nothing. Then the engine catches, roaring to life with a sound that seems almost defiant. Morozov climbs into the commander's hatch, his knees knocking against raw steel. There is no radio, only the clatter of machinery and the distant crack of rifle fire. He taps the driver's shoulder twice, the agreed signal, and the tank lurches forward. The exit is no longer a doorway, but a jagged gap blasted through the wall by earlier bombing. As the T-34 noses through, sunlight floods the interior, revealing bare metal and hastily chalked markings. Outside, German infantry are already moving among the ruins, unaware that a functioning tank is about to emerge from what they believe to be a dead factory. The tank fires its first round less than 50 meters from the building. The recoil slams Morozov against the hatch rim. He tastes blood and dust, but the effect is immediate. German soldiers scatter, diving for cover, as the shell smashes into a rubble barricade, sending bodies and stone flying. Behind them, the factory continues to burn. Inside another hall, production has shifted to improvisation. With supply lines cut and power unreliable, workers scavenge parts from damaged tanks dragged back under cover of night. A transmission pulled from a knocked-out vehicle is cleaned and fitted into a new hull. Tracks with cracked links are welded and hammered straight, just enough to hold for a few hours of combat. Chief Engineer Sergei Kuznetsov moves through the wreckage with a clipboard that has long since lost its paper. He memorizes what he sees instead. How many engines remain? How many guns can still be mounted? How many men are left alive to do the work? Each calculation is grim. A young machinist approaches him, face streaked with soot. They hit the tool room, he says. Presses are gone. Kuznetsov closes his eyes briefly. Then he opens them and points toward a corner where a hand-operated press stands, half buried under debris. Dig it out, he says. We'll use that. By mid-morning, German assault groups have reached the outer walls of the complex. Grenades arc through broken windows. Machine gun fire rakes the interior, bullets whining off steel and concrete. Red Army infantry fight back from firing positions set up between lathes and conveyor frames. In one corner, a group of workers huddle around a wounded man. A medic presses bandages against a torn leg, her hands slick with blood. The wounded man groans, then grips her sleeve. "Did we finish it?" he asks, his voice barely audible. She hesitates, then nods. Yes, it drove out. He exhales and goes still. German officers at the front struggle to comprehend what they are facing. Reports come in of tanks appearing suddenly at close range, without warning, from within factory ruins that were supposed to be neutralized. Anti-tank teams are repositioned again and again, only to be flanked by armor that should not exist. By afternoon, the Luftwaffe returns, but accuracy is impossible. Smoke and dust obscure targets. Bombs fall blindly, killing friend and foe alike. One strike collapses a section of the factory where several tanks were being assembled, burying them forever under tons of rubble. Kuznetsov watches from a distance, his jaw clenched. He does not look away. As dusk approaches, the pace slows not from choice, but exhaustion. Men and women slump against machines, grabbing minutes of rest whenever the shelling eases. Then the work resumes. Another tank is completed just before nightfall. Its crew is assembled from survivors of a unit destroyed the previous day. They exchange few words. There is nothing left to say. As darkness settles over Stalingrad, fires illuminate the factory like a funeral pyre. Yet from within the glow, engines continue to start, one by one, each roar echoing across the river. For the Germans, the factories were meant to be symbols of Soviet industry to be erased. Instead, they have become forges of resistance, shaping steel into weapons even as the city bleeds. September 27th, 1942. 6th Army Headquarters, Golubinsky. Generaloberst Friedrich Paulus stands at the long table beneath a flickering electric bulb, its weak light casting hard shadows across the faces of his senior officers. Outside the farmhouse that serves as headquarters, the night air carries the distant rumble of artillery from Stalingrad, a sound that never truly fades. Paulus has not removed his gloves. His fingers drum once against the tabletop, a small controlled motion that betrays his tension. A staff officer finishes reading the latest combat report and steps back. The silence that follows is heavy. Repeated sightings of newly deployed Soviet tanks in the northern factory sector, the officer had said. Losses to infantry and anti-tank units continue. Estimated origin, Dzerzhinsky and Stalingrad tractor factory complexes. Paulus exhales slowly through his nose. Again, he says, it is not a question. Across the table, General Walter von Seydlitz-Kurzbach shifts his weight. The enemy is improvising, he offers. They are throwing everything they have into those factories. If we concentrate, Paulus cuts him off with a raised hand. Concentration has already been ordered. Bombing, artillery, pioneer assaults. His voice is calm, but there is an edge to it now. And yet, they continue. He turns toward the Luftwaffe liaison officer, a colonel whose uniform is immaculate despite the conditions. I was assured, Paulus says evenly, that sustained aerial bombardment would make production impossible. The colonel stiffens. Herr Generaloberst, the targets have been hit repeatedly. The facilities are burning. But the terrain, Paulus repeats. Is the terrain now responsible for tanks appearing where none should be? No one answers. Paulus straightens, smoothing a crease in the map with deliberate care. He points to the northern edge of the city. These factories are to be eliminated, he says. Not suppressed, not contained, eliminated. I want them flattened until nothing moves within their walls. Artillery will fire continuously. The Luftwaffe will strike at first light and again at dusk. Infantry and pioneers will advance regardless of casualties. There is no protest. Orders are written, stamped, dispatched. By dawn, the guns begin. September the 27th, 1942, Northern Industrial District, Stalingrad. The bombardment descends with a fury unlike anything before it. Heavy artillery pounds the factory district in overlapping barrages. Shells arriving so rapidly that individual explosions blur into a single rolling concussion. The ground shakes constantly, turning footing uncertain even for men hardened by weeks of fighting. Inside the Red October factory, machinist Pavel Andreev is thrown from his feet as a shell detonates against the outer wall. He crashes into a lathe, the breath driven from his lungs. His ears ring violently, a high-pitched whine drowning out all other sound. When his hearing returns, it does so unevenly. He becomes aware first of shouting, then of screams, then of the grinding roar of a tank engine somewhere nearby. He forces himself upright, wincing as pain flares in his side. The floor is littered with debris and bodies alike, indistinguishable under dust and blood. A foreman waves frantically from behind a steel column. "We're moving it now," he yells. The tank in question is little more than a shell with a gun. Its turret lacks proper optics. Its armour bears dents from shrapnel received before it has even left the factory. And yet it moves. Its engines snarling as if eager to escape the collapsing building around it. Outside, German infantry advance behind the artillery fire, crouched low, weapons ready. They expect ruins, corpses, and silence. What they do not expect is the sudden appearance of a Soviet tank bursting through a cloud of dust, barely 30 meters ahead. The first German anti-tank grenade strikes the hull and bounces harmlessly away. The second detonates against the track, tearing loose a section of metal but failing to stop the vehicle. The tank fires at point-blank range. The blast tears through a squad sheltering behind rubble, leaving nothing but smoke and scattered equipment. German soldiers fall back instinctively, shouting warnings that barely register over the din. By mid-morning, Luftwaffe bombers arrive in waves. Heinkel H-111s and Ju-88s release their loads over the factory district, bombs falling in tight patterns meant to erase entire blocks. Stukas dive low, their sirens wailing as they plunge toward targets barely visible through smoke. Inside the factories, survival becomes a matter of minutes and meters. Workers and soldiers alike press themselves into trenches dug directly into the factory floors, or wedge themselves beneath heavy machinery in the hope it will shield them. Walls collapse, ceilings cave in. Fires spread unchecked, fed by oil and paint. Chief Engineer Kuznetsov is knocked unconscious when a beam collapses nearby. When he comes to, his head throbbing, he finds himself pinned beneath debris alongside a young Red Army private. The boy's eyes are wide with fear. "Are we buried?" the private asks. Kuznetsov tests the beam with his hands. It shifts slightly. "Not yet," he says. "Help me." Together, they wriggle free, emerging into a hall that no longer resembles a factory. The assembly line is gone, crushed under rubble. But against one wall, partially shielded by fallen masonry, 2 tank hulls remain intact. Kuznetsov stares at them for a long moment. Then he turns to the men gathering nearby. "We can still finish those," he says. Someone laughs, a short, incredulous sound. "Under this?" Kuznetsov nods. Under this. Throughout the day, German commanders receive conflicting reports. Aerial reconnaissance shows devastation beyond expectation. Ground units, however, continue to encounter Soviet armor emerging from the ruins, often at dangerously close range. By evening, Paulus receives a situation update that forces him to grip the edge of his desk. Enemy armor continues to appear from factory zones, the report reads. Production source not neutralized. Paulus closes his eyes. He has committed men, guns, aircraft. He has followed doctrine, and still the factories refuse to fall silent. As night descends once more over Stalingrad, the bombing tapers off, giving way to sporadic shellfire. Fires burn unchecked, lighting the city in hellish orange. Within the shattered factories, survivors emerge cautiously from hiding. And then, once more, the work resumes. Engines are inspected by lantern light. Ammunition is loaded by hand. Wounded men refuse evacuation until their tank is finished. One worker, his arm bound in a blood-soaked sleeve, insists on tightening the final bolts before collapsing from exhaustion. Another tank rolls out shortly before midnight, its engine echoing through the ruins. German listening posts hear the sound and report it in disbelief. The orders from headquarters had been clear: silence the factories. Instead, the ruins answer with steel and fire. September the 28th, EMIV 42, Stalingrad Tractor Factory, after midnight. The night air inside the factory is thick with smoke and the sour stench of burned oil. Lanterns and flashlights cast weak, trembling cones of light across twisted metal and shattered concrete. Somewhere in the darkness, water drips steadily from a ruptured pipe, each splash echoing like a countdown. Sergeant Viktor Lebedev tightens the strap of his padded tanker's helmet and listens to the sounds of labor continuing long after logic says it should have ended. The tank in front of him is still warm from welding. Its armor plates are mismatched in color, some green, some bare steel, others blackened by fire. The turret sits slightly off-center, corrected only by repeated hammer blows that rang through the hall an hour earlier. Lebedev runs a gloved hand over the hull, feeling the rough seams. It will have to be enough. A factory electrician named Boris crouches beside the engine compartment, his face illuminated by a single bulb hanging from a wire. "Fuel line's patched," Boris says without looking up. "If it leaks, it'll leak later. Lebedev nods. Later is fine. Around them, the factory feels almost subterranean now. Entire sections have collapsed, forcing production into narrow corridors formed by debris. The sound of artillery is distant, muffled by rubble and distance, but it never fully disappears. Every few minutes, a shell lands close enough to rattle the lantern glass. The crew climbs aboard in silence. There are no speeches, no last-minute instructions. They have all seen what waits outside. Lebedev lowers himself into the commander's position, his boots scraping against raw steel. He smells sweat, oil, and fear, his own included. The engine coughs, sputters, then catches. The sound reverberates through the ruins, loud and unmistakable. Somewhere beyond the factory walls, German soldiers will hear it and curse. The tank begins to move, inching forward through a gap cleared just wide enough for its tracks. Workers stand back, some raising their hands in farewell, others simply watching with hollow eyes. One woman crosses herself quickly as the tank passes. As the T-34 emerges into the open, the night explodes into chaos. German flares streak into the sky, bathing the ruins in harsh white light. Machine gun fire erupts almost immediately, tracers sparking against the tank's armor. Lebedev ducks instinctively, then forces himself upright, scanning for targets. The gun fires, the muzzle flash blinding in the darkness. The recoil slams through the tank, rattling every bolt and plate. German voices shout in alarm, then break apart into confusion. Behind Lebedev's tank, another follows, and another after that, each one rolling out of the factory like a ghost, appearing where the enemy least expects it. Some stall and must be abandoned. Others take hits almost immediately, flames licking from their engine decks, but enough survive to disrupt the German lines, to force them back, to buy minutes and meters of ground. Inside the factory, the cost is counted in bodies. Near what was once the administrative wing, a group of workers digs frantically through rubble, where a bomb has collapsed a production area. They work with bare hands and bent crowbars, ignoring the blood running from their palms. A young man named Yuri shouts when he hears movement beneath the debris. They pull two men free, coughing and half blind. A third is already dead, crushed beneath a steel beam. No one pauses. There is still work to do. Chief Engineer Kuznetsov moves through the ruins, his coat torn, his face streaked with grime. He keeps track of what remains with a kind of grim mental arithmetic. Engines left, hulls left, men left. Each number shrinks relentlessly. At first light, the Germans attack again. September 28th, 1942. Dawn, Northern Factory District. As the sky lightens to a dull grey, German infantry advance under covering fire, picking their way through the ruins with practiced caution. They have learned, painfully, that the factories are not empty shells, but living traps. Oberleutnant Karl Weiss leads his platoon toward the remains of the tractor factory's outer workshops. He has lost 2 squads in the last 3 days. One to artillery, one to tanks that seem to rise from the rubble itself. He tightens his grip on his MP40 and signals his men forward. Then he hears it, the unmistakable rumble of an engine. Weiss freezes. "Panzer!" someone shouts unnecessarily. A Soviet tank bursts through a cloud of dust barely 20 meters away, its gun already traversing. The Germans scatter, diving for cover as the tank fires. The explosion hurls Weiss backward, slamming him into a broken wall. His ears ring violently. When he scrambles to his feet, dazed and bleeding, the tank is already moving on, grinding deeper into German-held ground. Weiss watches it go, disbelief washing over him. "They're coming from the factory," he mutters. "They're still coming." By mid-morning, German commanders are forced to divert reserves, meant for other sectors to contain the factory threat. Assault plans are delayed, timetables slip. Every unexpected tank forces a recalculation. Back at headquarters, Paulus receives another update. Losses are mounting. Ammunition expenditure is high, and still the factory sector refuses to collapse. He pinches the bridge of his nose, fatigue etched into his features. The factories were supposed to be annihilated days ago. Instead, they have become a source of continuous attrition, bleeding his forces white in close, brutal combat. Inside Stalingrad, the workers and soldiers sense the strain they are causing. Each tank that rolls out is a small victory, a proof that they are still fighting, still defying the enemy's expectations. As the day wears on, another tank is completed under sporadic shell fire. Its crew mounts up without ceremony. The engine starts. It moves. The factory no longer resembles an industrial site. It is a battlefield layered atop a workshop, layered atop a graveyard. And yet, within that layered ruin, production continues, not by schedule or quota, but by sheer will. The Germans had expected silence, smoke, and collapse. Instead, the night and dawn have delivered them steel, fire, and the grinding sound of tracks that refuse to stop. September 30th, 1942, northern Stalingrad, Red October, factory perimeter. The attack begins at first light, announced not by trumpets or shouted commands, but by the sudden tearing roar of flamethrowers. Oberfeldwebel Heinrich Lenz crouches behind a shattered brick wall, his face smeared with soot, his eyes burning from smoke and sleeplessness. He has fought in Poland, in France, and across the Ukrainian steppe, but nothing has prepared him for this. Combat measured not in kilometers or even streets, but in meters of wreckage and twisted steel. "Loss!" an officer shouts, and Lenz's squad surges forward. They advance through a gap blasted in the factory wall only hours earlier, boots crunching over glass and slag. The interior smells like a furnace left too long unattended. Hot metal, oil, and decay. Somewhere deeper inside, a machine gun opens fire, its bullets snapping overhead and chewing into iron beams. The Germans drop flat, returning fire into the smoke. Lenz crawls forward, heart hammering, and peers around a fallen press. What he sees makes his stomach tighten. Not soldiers, at least not only soldiers, but civilians in greasy overalls, crouched beside Red Army infantry, passing ammunition, firing rifles, dragging the wounded out of the line of fire. The distinction between combatant and worker has vanished entirely. A Soviet grenade detonates nearby, the blast lifting Lenz off the ground and slamming him into a column. His ears ring violently. When his vision clears, he sees a shape moving through the smoke. A tank. "Panzer!" Someone screams too late. The T-34 appears like a phantom, emerging from between collapsed walls scarcely 15 meters away. Its engine roars, drowning out all other sound. The tank fires, the blast tearing through a cluster of German pioneers preparing a satchel charge. Flames and debris fill the air. Men scatter, some burning, some screaming. Lenz scrambles backward, terror clawing at his chest. He has faced enemy armor before, but never like this. Never at such distance. Never from inside a building that was supposed to be neutralized. Behind the advancing Germans, artillery continues to pound the factory complex, but the close quarters fighting renders heavy fire increasingly dangerous. Shells risk killing German troops as often as Soviet defenders. Orders to press forward come anyway. At 6th Army headquarters, Paulus listens to increasingly frantic radio traffic. Assault units are bogged down. Losses are severe. Progress is measured in rooms, not objectives. And the tanks, those impossible tanks, keep appearing. A staff officer reports. Enemy armor engaged at point-blank range inside factory halls. Origin unclear. Paulus closes his eyes briefly. The implication is obvious and infuriating. The Soviets are not merely defending the factories. They are using them as weapons. Inside the Red October complex, Captain Antonov rallies a handful of survivors behind a row of massive steel rollers. Ammunition is low. Faces are grey with exhaustion. A young private stares at Antonov, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "Comrade Captain," he says, "are there more tanks?" Antonov looks toward the far end of the hall, where shapes move in shadow and sparks flare intermittently. "There will be," he says. "There always are." Near the assembly area, Chief Engineer Kuznetsov oversees what may be the last tank they can complete. The hull is scorched. The turret ring is damaged. The gun has been salvaged from a wrecked vehicle dragged back under fire. It is a patchwork machine, held together by skill, improvisation, and desperation. A German shell strikes nearby, collapsing part of the ceiling. Debris rains down, killing one worker instantly and wounding 2 others. Kuznetsov staggers, regains his footing, and shouts for the work to continue. "Finish it," he roars. "Finish it now!" The crew assembles even as bullets snap overhead. One man crosses himself before climbing into the driver's seat. Another kisses a small icon and tucks it into his jacket. The engine starts on the second attempt, coughing smoke into the hall. As the tank begins to move, German infantry burst through a side doorway, firing wildly. One worker falls, shot through the chest, collapsing against the hull. His blood streaks the armour as the tank rolls past, carrying the mark with it. Outside, the fighting reaches a fever pitch. German units are forced to fall back repeatedly under sudden armoured counterattacks. Anti-tank guns are destroyed almost as soon as they are brought forward. The Soviets exploit every gap, every moment of confusion, striking and vanishing into the ruins. Oberfeldwebel Lentz finds himself pinned behind a heap of scrap metal, his squad reduced to 3 men. He hears the tank before he sees it, the grinding of tracks vibrating through the ground. He fires his rifle uselessly as the T-34 passes close enough for him to see the dents and unfinished paint. "This is madness," he mutters. "They're building them here, under fire." As afternoon wears on, German commanders begin to recognize the truth they have been resisting. The factories cannot be taken quickly. They cannot be silenced by bombardment alone. Every hour spent fighting inside them bleeds men and momentum from the 6th Army. Paulus receives a final report as dusk approaches. Casualties exceeding expectations. Minimal territorial gain. Continued enemy armoured resistance originating from factory zones. He sets the report down slowly. In Stalingrad, the Germans have encountered not just a city, but a system, a living mechanism where industry and defence are fused beyond separation. Every destroyed workshop becomes a fortress. Every surviving machine becomes a weapon. As night falls again over the factory district, fires burn unchecked, illuminating scenes of devastation and defiance. Inside the ruins, the surviving workers and soldiers take stock of their losses, then return to what they know how to do. They build. The German assault has reached arm's length closer than ever before, and still, the factories answer not with silence, but with steel. October 1st, 1942. Northern Stalingrad. Factory ruins along the Volga. Before dawn, the sky flashes white as if torn open. The Luftwaffe has returned with renewed fury. Waves of bombers droning overhead, while artillery fires in near-continuous barrages from the west. The ground trembles so violently that it feels as though the earth itself is being torn apart. Inside the remains of the Red October factory, Major Ivan Zaitsev grips the edge of a concrete trench dug directly into the factory floor, his knuckles white as another detonation collapses part of the wall above him. He has been fighting for days without rest. His unit, what remains of it, now occupies a stretch of factory halls no more than 50 meters deep. Behind them lies the Volga. In front of them, German infantry are massing again. A bomb slams into the complex with a thunderous crack. The shockwave rips through the hall, extinguishing lanterns and plunging everything into darkness. Men shout in panic. Dust fills the air so thick it feels solid in the lungs. When the dust begins to settle, the lights do not return. "Generators are gone," someone yells. For a moment it feels as though the end has come. Without power, without light, without machines, the factory should finally fall silent. Instead, candles are lit. Small flames flicker to life across the darkness, their weak glow reflecting off steel hulls and oil-slick floors. Workers and soldiers move carefully, speaking in low voices. Production does not stop. It adapts. In one corner, machinist Pavel Andreev works a hand-crank drill. sweat streaming down his face as he bores mounting holes by sheer muscle. Nearby, a welder uses an improvised torch, fed by scavenged gas canisters, the flame unstable but just hot enough to seal a seam. Every movement is slower now, more dangerous, but it continues. German forward observers report the devastation with satisfaction. Entire sections of the factory are flattened. Fires burn uncontrollably. No sane production facility could still function under these conditions. And yet, within hours, German infantry report encountering another Soviet tank near the riverbank, advancing from the direction of the factories. At 6th Army headquarters, Paulus listens to the report in silence. His face has grown gaunt, his eyes ringed with fatigue. He asks no questions now. The pattern is undeniable. Inside the factory, Kuznetsov counts what remains by candlelight. One engine, one usable gun. A single hull damaged but repairable. Enough parts, perhaps, for one more tank. One more, he says quietly. The words spread quickly. One more tank means one more chance to blunt the German assault. One more hour gained. One more proof that they are still alive. Work begins immediately. Outside, German infantry push forward again under the cover of smoke. Oberleutnant Weiss leads what remains of his platoon toward the river-facing workshops. His uniform is torn. His voice is hoarse. He has lost track of how many days he has been fighting inside these ruins. They cannot have anything left, he mutters. It must be finished. Then he hears it. The low, unmistakable growl of an engine. His men freeze. Some laugh weakly, convinced it must be imagination. Then the sound grows louder, closer, vibrating through the rubble beneath their feet. A T-34 bursts from a smoke-filled breach near the riverbank, its hull scorched, its markings barely visible. It fires almost immediately, the blast shattering a German firing position and sending men diving for cover. Weiss is thrown to the ground, stunned and bleeding from the scalp. When he looks up, the tank is already moving past him, heading straight for the riverfront defences. Impossible, he whispers. Inside the factory, cheers erupt briefly, raw and hoarse, as the tank departs. Some men weep openly. Others simply sit down where they stand, too exhausted to react. Kuznetsov sinks onto a crate, his shoulders slumping for the first time. He knows there will be no more after this. The parts are gone. The machines are destroyed. The men are dying. But the Germans do not know that. As darkness falls once more, the factory lies in ruins, gutted and burning. And yet, for another day, it has done the impossible. It has built tanks under fire, under bombing, under conditions no planner had ever imagined survivable. The Luftwaffe's bombs have shattered walls and crushed steel. They have not broken the will that turned ruins into weapons. October 2nd, 1942. 6th Army, Forward Command Post, outskirts of Stalingrad. The radio crackles continuously, a harsh, grating sound that seems to scrape at the nerves. Oberst Wilhelm Adam stands hunched over the communications table, headset pressed tight against his ear as reports pour in from units fighting along the factory district. The cramped bunker smells of damp earth, cigarette smoke, and stale coffee. Maps cover the walls, their neat symbols now smudged and overwritten so many times they barely make sense. "Repeat," Adam says sharply. "You're saying another tank?" The voice on the other end is strained, almost incredulous. "Yes, Herr Oberst, Soviet medium tank. Emerged from the river-facing workshops near Red October. Engaged our positions at close range." Adam closes his eyes for a brief moment, then signals the radio operator to log the report. It is not the first of its kind. It will not be the last. Across the bunker, General Paulus listens without speaking. He has aged visibly in the past week. His uniform hangs looser on his frame. His posture remains rigid, but there is a tightness around his mouth now, a sign of the strain beneath the discipline. "How many tanks today?" Paulus asks finally. Adam checks his notes. "Confirmed sightings. 4, possibly more unreported." Paulus nods slowly. 4 tanks, from factories that on paper should no longer exist. Later that morning, Paulus convenes a conference with his senior commanders. The mood is tense, the air thick with unspoken frustration. Intelligence officers present aerial photographs taken at dawn. The images show devastation beyond any previous stage. Entire factory blocks reduced to rubble, roofs gone, walls collapsed inward. And yet, one officer says quietly, armoured vehicles continue to appear. Paulus straightens. This is not mass production, he says. It is something else. Improvisation, cannibalization. But it is effective, another officer replies. That is the most troubling part. Each tank, no matter how crudely finished, forces German infantry to halt, redeploy, and absorb casualties. The psychological effect is disproportionate to the material output. German soldiers have begun to refer to the factories as the place where tanks grow. At the front, Oberfeldwebel Lenz hears the phrase whispered among replacements brought in overnight. He says nothing. He has seen it with his own eyes. He knows it is not superstition. October 2nd, 1942. Red October. Factory ruins. Inside what remains of a machine hall, Captain Yuri Antonov gathers his men. They are few now. Ammunition is critically low. Many are wounded. But the Germans have paused, wary of advancing too quickly into the shattered complex. Antonov uses the lull to reposition his forces, shifting men through holes blasted in walls, reinforcing firing points behind piles of debris. He knows the pattern now. The Germans will probe again, cautiously. They always do. Nearby, Kuznetsov walks slowly through the ruins, taking in the finality of it all. There will be no more tanks. He is certain of that now. The miracle has been stretched to its limit. A young worker approaches him hesitantly. "Comrade engineer," he says, "they think we can still build more." Kuznetsov looks at the boy, his face lined and tired. "Let them think that," he says. "It keeps them afraid." Keeps, and it does. German commanders adjust their tactics accordingly. Infantry advances become slower, more deliberate. Anti-tank guns are kept closer at hand. Flamethrower units are reinforced. Every ruined workshop is treated as a potential ambush point. These adjustments cost time the Soviets desperately need. Across the Volga, replacement units continue to arrive under cover of darkness. Ammunition stocks are replenished just enough to keep the defenders fighting. The factories, though no longer producing tanks in any meaningful number, continue to serve as fortresses anchoring the northern defense. Paulus receives a final report that evening, summarizing the situation. The factory district remains contested. Soviet resistance is stubborn. Losses are ongoing. He sets the paper down and stares at the map. The expectation had been simple: destroy the factories, break production, collapse resistance. Instead, the factories have become symbols of defiance, of endurance, of an enemy who refuses to behave as expected. For the German command, the shock is no longer in seeing tanks roll from the ruins. It is in realizing how much those tanks have already cost them. October 3rd, 1942. Northern Stalingrad. Rubble of the Red October and STZ complexes. The dawn comes slowly, filtered through smoke and ash, turning the ruins into a landscape of silhouettes and shadows. Snow has not yet fallen, but the cold has arrived, creeping into bones and machinery alike. Lieutenant Sergei Volkov stands near a shattered assembly bay, his breath fogging in the air as he listens for sounds that no longer come as often as they once did. The hammering, the welding, the engines coughing to life. The factories are quieter now, not silent, but changed. Volkov knows the difference. He's been here long enough to feel it in the air, in the way men move more cautiously, conserving strength. The last tank left the ruins the night before. Everyone knows it, even if no one says it aloud. German artillery resumes shortly after sunrise, but with less ferocity than before. The bombardment is probing now, cautious, almost respectful. The enemy no longer believes the factories are empty, no matter how ruined they appear. Inside a partially collapsed hall, Captain Antonov briefs his remaining men. There are barely 24 of them left, a mix of infantry, tankers without tanks, and workers who have refused evacuation. They sit among the wreckage of machines that once stamped steel and forged engines, now twisted into grotesque shapes by heat and explosives. We hold, Antonov says simply, same as before. No one argues, no one asks how. Across the ruins, German infantry advance in small groups, rifles ready, eyes scanning every shadow. Oberfeldwebel Lenz moves with them, his nerves stretched thin. The rumours have reached even the newest replacements. Factories that produce tanks under fire. Workers who fight like soldiers. Machines that refuse to die. A German private whispers, "Do you hear it?" Lenz listens. There is nothing but wind and distant gunfire. "No," he says. "That's the point." The absence of sound is almost worse. Every doorway is approached as if a tank might burst through it at any moment. Progress slows to a crawl. Minutes stretch into hours. At headquarters, Paulus studies the situation with grim clarity. The factory district has consumed divisions' worth of strength. It has disrupted schedules, drained reserves, and shattered assumptions. Even if the factories never produce another tank, the damage is already done. He dictates an order emphasizing consolidation rather than reckless advance. Hold gains. Reduce resistance methodically. There is no triumph in his voice. Inside the ruins, Kuznetsov sits on an overturned crate, staring at a wrecked hull half buried under debris. He runs his hand along the cold steel, remembering when it had been warm, alive with possibility. "We did enough," he murmurs, though no one is listening. A Soviet political officer arrives with a small group of reinforcements, their faces pale with shock at the devastation. One of them looks around and asks quietly, "Is this where they built the tanks?" Antonov nods. "Yes." The officer shakes his head slowly. "They're talking about it everywhere," he says. "Across the river, in the city. They say the factories never stopped." Antonov allows himself a tired smile. "Good," he says. "Let them talk." Because the story is already growing beyond the truth. Tanks rolling straight from assembly lines into battle. Crews climbing aboard machines still warm from welding. Factories that functioned no matter how many bombs fell. Some of it is true, some of it is not. But all of it serves its purpose. German soldiers hesitate now in the factory district, expecting the impossible. Soviet soldiers draw strength from the legend, even as the reality grows bleaker by the hour. As evening falls, a German patrol cautiously enters a hall once used for final tank assembly. They find nothing but wreckage. Burned tools, shattered cranes, the skeleton of a hull crushed beyond repair. No engines, no guns, no movement. And yet they withdraw just as cautiously as they entered. That night, along the Volga, Soviet loudspeakers crackle to life. Broadcasting music and announcements meant as much for morale as for information. Among the rumours whispered in the trenches and cellars, one persists above all others. The factories fought. They fought with steel and sweat, with men and machines, with tanks born under fire. And even now, as their production finally falters, their impact remains. The Germans did not just battle an army in Stalingrad. They battled an idea. That industry itself could become a weapon, even in ruins. October 5th, 1942. Northern Stalingrad, ruins overlooking the Volga. The wind cuts sharply off the river, carrying with it the smell of smoke, rot, and cordite. Snow flurries drift briefly through the air, melting as soon as they touch the warm rubble. Sergeant Viktor Lebedev crouches in a shallow foxhole scraped into what was once a factory floor, his rifle resting across his knees. He has not slept properly in days. His eyes burn, his hands shake slightly, and every sound feels louder than it should. The factories are no longer producing tanks, but they are still killing men. German artillery resumes in short, violent bursts. Shells crashing into the ruins with enough force to send shockwaves through the ground. The fire is no longer indiscriminate. It is precise, deliberate, aimed at positions identified over days of bloody trial and error. The Germans have learned where Soviet defenders tend to hide, where resistance is likely to stiffen. Each adjustment costs lives on both sides. Lebedev peers over the edge of his cover as German infantry advance cautiously through the debris field ahead. They move like men who expect death at every step, spreading out, pausing often, weapons trained on doorways and shattered walls. Gone is the confidence of the early days. What remains is grim determination. A machine gun opens fire from somewhere to Lebedev's left, cutting down 2 Germans before being silenced by a grenade. The explosion echoes through the ruins, followed by screams. Lebedev flinches, then forces himself to focus. He fires carefully, conserving ammunition. There will be no resupply until night, if then. Nearby, Captain Antonov coordinates what little defense remains. His voice is hoarse, his uniform stiff with grime and blood. He has lost count of how many men he has ordered into positions they would never leave. Each decision feels heavier than the last. "We hold here," he tells a corporal, pointing to a collapsed wall overlooking the river. "If they break through, they're at the bank." The corporal nods and moves off without comment. Inside the ruins, Kuznetsov walks slowly, leaning on a piece of twisted rebar like a cane. His body aches from old injuries and new ones alike. He stops near a section of the factory where several tanks had once stood in various stages of completion. Now there is nothing but crushed steel and blackened concrete. A young soldier recognizes him and offers a canteen. Kuznetsov drinks gratefully, then hands it back. "Did it matter?" the soldier asks quietly. "The tanks, all of it." Kuznetsov looks out toward the Volga, where smoke drifts low over the water. Barges move cautiously along the far bank, unloading supplies under sporadic fire. "It mattered," he says. "They're still here, aren't they?" The fighting intensifies as the day wears on. German infantry push closer to the river, determined to sever the last Soviet footholds. Soviet defenders fight from cellars, trenches, and the wreckage of machines that once symbolized peaceful labor. At 6th Army headquarters, Paulus reviews casualty figures that make his jaw tighten. The factory battles have consumed far more men and ammunition than planned. The gains achieved are real, but they are costly, and winter is approaching. He understands now that even when the factories finally fall, the price paid will echo far beyond Stalingrad. As dusk approaches, the Germans launch another concentrated push toward the riverbank. Lebedev and his comrades brace themselves as shells explode around them, showering the position with debris. One man is hit, collapsing without a sound. Another drags him back, teeth clenched, as bullets snap overhead. When darkness finally settles, the fighting slows but does not stop. Tracers arc through the night. Flares burst overhead, casting the ruins in ghostly light. The river reflects the glow of fires like a ribbon of molten metal. The factories are dying, but they are taking everything they can with them. October 8th, 1942. 6th Army headquarters, west of Stalingrad. Cold rain taps steadily against the roof of the command post, seeping into the mud outside and turning the steppe into a grey morass. Inside, the air is heavy with exhaustion. Maps lie spread across the table, their once clear lines now overwritten with pencil marks, corrections, and crossed-out plans. Generaloberst Friedrich Paulus stands alone for a moment, studying the northern sector of the city where the factory districts are now marked with a single word: gesichert, secured. The word feels false in his mouth. A staff officer enters quietly and hands him the latest report. Paulus reads it without expression. The Red October and tractor factory areas are largely in German hands now. Organized Soviet resistance has diminished to scattered pockets. No further armored vehicles have been encountered for several days. The factories have finally gone quiet. Paulus sets the paper down slowly. This is what he had demanded weeks ago, what he had expected, and yet there is no sense of relief. Outside, Szym, the sound of artillery has lessened. The battle has shifted south, deeper into the city's ruins. But the damage inflicted in the north remains, a damage not easily measured in captured ground. Across the river, Soviet units regroup, battered but unbroken. Reinforcements continue to arrive. The factory defenders, or what remains of them, are absorbed into new formations or evacuated under fire. Many never leave the ruins where they fought and worked until the end. October 8th, 1942. Red October Factory, interior ruins. Captain Yuri Antonov walks slowly through a hall that once shook with machinery and gunfire alike. Now it is eerily still. The floor is littered with spent casings, broken tools, and the personal remnants of those who will never return. Helmets, gloves, scraps of paper with names written on them. He stops beside a burned-out T-34 hull, half buried under collapsed masonry. The tank never made it out. Its gun is twisted, its engine crushed. Antonov places a hand on the cold steel, bowing his head briefly. Nearby, Kuznetsov sits against a wall, his strength finally spent. He coughs weakly, his breath rattling in his chest. A medic kneels beside him, checking his pulse. "They'll talk about this," Kuznetsov murmurs, his voice barely audible. "They won't believe it." The medic leans closer. "What won't they believe?" "That we kept building," Kuznetsov says, "even when it made no sense." In German forward units, the realization comes gradually, then all at once. Officers and enlisted men alike walk through the captured factory halls in disbelief. They find assembly jigs smashed by bombs, engines half installed, hulls marked with chalk measurements and fingerprints frozen in time. One German officer stops and stares at a set of handwritten notes, still clipped to a workbench. Gear ratios, fuel pressures, adjustments made under fire. "So it was true," he says quietly. "They really did it here." The reports sent back to higher command are no longer dismissive. They are analytical, almost reverent. The factories did not merely resist. They shaped the battle. They delayed advances, forced tactical changes, drained manpower, and shattered assumptions about what industrial warfare looked like in an urban siege. Paulus reads these assessments days later. He understands their meaning. Time lost in Stalingrad can never be recovered. Men lost here cannot be replaced quickly enough. And winter is coming. The factories are silent now. But their impact is already irreversible. October 10th, 1942. Stalingrad, northern factory district at dawn. The morning is unnaturally quiet. A pale light filters through low clouds, illuminating a landscape that no longer resembles a city or a factory, but something stripped down to its rawest elements: ruin, ash, and steel. Along the Volga's edge, smoke drifts lazily upward from fires that have burned for weeks, fed by ore-soaked debris and shattered machines. The sounds of battle have moved elsewhere, leaving behind an eerie stillness broken only by the creak of twisted metal in the cold wind. Lieutenant Sergei Volkov steps carefully through what remains of the Stalingrad tractor factory. His boots crunch over glass and slag. Every few meters he passes something that once had a name and a purpose. A press, a crane, a conveyor, now reduced to abstract wreckage. He pauses near the shell of a tank hull crushed under tons of concrete, its armour split open like a rib cage. This is where it ended. German soldiers move through the ruins as well, their posture wary despite the absence of gunfire. They examine the wreckage with a mixture of disbelief and exhaustion. Some take photographs, others simply stare. They had expected factories to be silenced by bombs and shells, not to fight back. One soldier runs his hand along a section of scorched armour and shakes his head. "It was still warm," he says quietly, as if remembering something someone told him, when they came out. Across the city, German commanders finalise reports summarising the northern battles. The language is careful, precise. Casualty figures are high. Ammunition expenditure is extreme. Operational delays are noted. The factory districts, it concludes, required a disproportionate commitment of force to secure. What the reports cannot fully capture is the effect those days had on the men who fought them. For Soviet soldiers and workers, the factories have become more than workplaces or defensive positions. They are proof that even under the most relentless fire, something can still be built. That resistance does not always look like counterattacks or sweeping maneuvers, but sometimes like a single engine started in the dark, a single tank rolling forward with unfinished paint. For the Germans, the lesson is harsher. In Stalingrad, destruction did not always equal defeat. Bombardment did not guarantee silence, and industrial power, when fused directly to the front line, could bleed an army white even as it collapsed. Days later, as winter tightens its grip, the battle for Stalingrad grinds on toward its inevitable climax. The factories fade from the headlines of the war, replaced by encirclement, starvation, and surrender. But among those who were there, the memory endures. They remember tanks that came from nowhere. They remember machines built under fire. They remember a factory that refused to die. In the end, the steel forged in those ruins did more than destroy enemy positions. It shattered assumptions and helped turn the tide of the war at Stalingrad.